public lectures and events. There will be some e-news sign-up sheets that will make their way around the audience. Just a friendly reminder to please turn off cell phones or any other electronic devices that may make noise during today's program. With that said, I'd like to introduce Steve from the zoo to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Carolyn, and welcome everyone to the St. Louis Zoo. And I want to thank the Academy of Science for promoting our conservation lecture series. We wouldn't be able to do this without their help. But, you know, I should probably say that the last several years have been the year of carnivores here at the St. Louis Zoo with all the projects that we're involved with now. And as you know, we just started groundbreaking and working on our new polar bear exhibit. So we're very excited about that. Tonight's speaker, Dr. Tom Smith, I had the pleasure of spending time with Dr. Smith today. I gave him a tour and had a chance to talk to him for a while earlier today when we were going around the zoo. And one of the first things that I realized about Dr. Smith is that he has a real passion for carnivores, and not just polar bears and brown bears and black bears, which he really knows a lot about these animals. But it was really nice to be able to compare notes with Dr. Smith, because albeit, you know, he does all of his work in the wild, but to compare notes with what we've learned about carnivores after many years was very refreshing. Dr. Smith actually is the associate professor of the Department of Plant and Wildlife Sciences at Brigham Young University and research wildlife biologist at Polar Bears International. Polar Bears International is an organization that we've partnered with now for several years, and they are doing some great research in Manitoba. They're also supporting Dr. Smith, the work that he's doing up on Alaska's North Slope. He's going to share some of the work that he's been doing over the past decade exploring the little-known world of polar bear denning on Alaska's North Slope. Since 2002, he and his crew have studied polar bears' maternal denning behavior. What and where, when and where dens are located, den emergence and abandonment dates, why bears remain at dens as long as they do, how bears respond to human activity near their dens. He's also going to discuss the impact of climate change and options for polar bears in a warming world. The St. Louis Zoo WildCare Institute is pleased to support the important work of Dr. Smith and his crew, which will help protect and preserve polar bears for future generations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tom Smith.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure to be here and to have been able to spend time with a lot of your zoo workers and curators and keepers and some of the managers. It's safe to say the wildlife here are in very, very good hands. I learned a lot. It was a great day for me. And yes, I wear a hat everywhere I go. My wife won't let me wear it to bed, but that's okay. I've gotten sunburned a few times. You know, you get older, you lose your hair, so it just kind of sits on there. What we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit about this work on polar bears. I feel much more comfortable with brown grizzly bears. I spent a lot more time with them. You know, I like polar bears, but it's just so blasted cold. It's terrible. You know, a lot of the places we work, it sits between 30 to 50 below zero, and we're outside with them. And so it's just miserable. The least of my worries ever is the bear. It's always just about all the problems that come with that kind of cold. So I wanted to start with, Steve mentioned Polar Bear International, and I do work with them. And I think that what I'd like to do is start with a video that just it's a kind of an overview of what I do, because what's kind of fun about it is that it gives you, oh man, look at that. It's hard to do this. Let's see, duplicate. It gives you an idea about an overview of my work. Plus you get to see some pictures of polar bears, so that's pretty cool. So CJ Carter, who's one of PBI's consultants, put this together. I really think you'll enjoy seeing this because it explains the project. This is called Forward-Looking Infrared. We're in an airplane When we see dens with flare, it opens the door for us to study an animal which was so secretive and undetectable.
See, there she is. I can see her moving, I'm pretty sure. You see the two ears and the nose looking at us? You can see.
To conserve a species, we cannot do that without a basic understanding of its life history.
I'm Tom Smith. I'm an associate professor at Brigham Young University. I have been working on bears for about 21 years, polar bears for the last 12. I am a scientific advisory member for Polar Bears International.
I've been leading up a research effort to observe polar bears where the mothers have their cubs, den sites on the northern shores of Alaska. We began like we do with grizzly bears, which was putting up blinds, everything from dens at about 400 meters from the dens. We'd put these blinds up and just sit and wait. I mean, the bears were the least of our concerns. We saw a significant amount of time the bears are spending was not in what we call natural activities. They're basically studying us. That was big impetus to find another method to record these images. We're using digital cameras which transmit signals many, many miles to receivers. The camera represents a pure and untainted view of bear behavior that is natural. One of the struggles we have today in biology is the Earth is changing so fast that baseline natural behaviors are increasingly hard to find. It's very difficult to ascribe a degree of disturbance to some kind of animal's behavior if you don't know what baseline is. Well, what we're seeing is a crucial part of the life cycle of the bear. When a mother invests its time in reproduction, that time can't be interrupted. The mother becomes pregnant. Like all bear species in North America, they have what's called delayed implantation. The fertilized egg does not immediately implant into the wall of the uterus. The mothers that are pregnant know instinctively to withdraw themselves from the areas of active hunting. Denning habitat is entirely about finding places that have a low probability of being detected by other bears. And that happens in late summer, fall. They come off the ice, they stay on the land, and as then the snows begin to accumulate, they find pockets of snow capable of supporting a den. They'll burrow in sometime in November, and they will then let the snow seal it over. The 1st of January, first weeks of January, then the cubs are born. They have very light covering of hair. Their eyes are closed, their ears don't work, they can't hear. And these little 1 kilogram to 1.5 kilograms cubs attach, and then they begin drinking the mother's milk, which is about 32% milk fat. These little cubs born at 1 kilogram, completely dependent on her protection and time in the den so that they can go out into 40 below zero weather. That time can't be interrupted, and they'll remain in the den without emerging at all until in Alaska about the 1st of March. So once we know they're in there and we position our cameras, then the first thing we see will be the mother with her powerful, body pushing up a block of snow, sometimes up to 1 meter thick. Making occasional forays for the cubs to run about. They basically just stay in the den. They'll remain at those dens anywhere from a day to a month. But they are evaluating the cubs in some innate way as to their ability to endure, the roughness of the ice, to follow, to be bonded, to be able to keep up. So they're watching that. As soon as they can, they leave. And they instinctively know to go due north. If you're born a male polar bear, you'll never go back to a den again. Rowing the cubs as they move back. They need to bond as a cub to mother. They learn social interactions, which are crucial for survival later on. If the key forage item that you are after is tied to ice, then you're tied to ice. Polar bears do not jump in the ocean and chase seals. They could never catch them, but they can very effectively catch them when they lie in wait on the ice for seals to haul out. Ice is everything. Without ice, they are now a terrestrial mammal. You take something that big, it cannot live. It just simply can't make a living.
What it looks like
We're finding that on average, bears are spending 3.5 weeks less time in dens. Less time in the den, the less prepared the cubs are to survive, and the less they will survive. And this is directly in response to thinning ice that is no longer as stable as it used to be.
A population has to have new bears coming into it. And if activities from humans potentially or possibly impact that recruitment, we call it, then we need to be paying attention to that.
These polar bears motivate us. They make us say, hey, a planet without that animal is not acceptable. If 7 billion people got us into this trouble, then obviously 7 billion people can get us out. That's PBI's logo there, but that gives you a pretty nice overview of what's going on with the project and some of the data. But let's take a look at this actual study, and then maybe you'll have some questions. I'll have some time at the end of it for you to ask questions. I do want to recognize some of the people and donors, of course. First of all, I am really grateful for the zoo to invite me here for this opportunity to talk about the work. The zoo has been a supporter of the work. And so it's their way also checking in to see that their money's actually making it to the North Slope. It does. That's B.J. Kershaw for Polar Bears International. He's got some pretty nice, we call them snot sickles on his face there, which is what happens at 40 below. That's Wes Larson. He helps on the project. He's one of my graduate students. That's me with a couple bears. Some people don't like you holding bears, but that, the mother certainly would not, but she's tranquilized, so she didn't have much to say about it. But we have to handle these bears. I understand it's kind of a trade-off, but that's the only way we know that they're in the situation they're in today because of radio tagging and tracking. So that's what I was doing there. Those cubs weigh about 35 pounds each, and that's April. So they have been out of the den maybe about a couple weeks. So they grow really fast. They double in body weight every 2 weeks. And there's another graduate student of mine, Rusty Robinson. And then Jay Olson, kind of looks like the Arctic Taliban there. But he's a good kid. And then these are some of the different donors, the Hogle Zoo, Columbus Zoo, St. Louis Zoo, and then we have some money from some of the oil companies as well. What I'm going to look at here is the fact that this issue always arises. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but global climate change in the polar bear, you'd obviously have to live under a rock not to be aware of the ongoing debate, but among those who study the bear, there is very little debate that the climate in the Arctic is undergoing very dramatic change. I think former USGS polar bear biologist, and he's PBI's current chief advisor, and also my former supervisor and a friend, Stephen Amstrup, and I got a picture of him here. There's Steve. He said, as goes the ice, so goes the bear, and we can talk a little about that, but it's it's a strong statement. After all, they once lived on the land, and surely they could do that again. And the question is, or can they really? It's certainly clear that if we do nothing, these wonderful animals may well have to live on the land. And so let's take a look here. That experiment of polar bears on the land has already been acted out. And of course, you're familiar with this. I think this is, I don't know if you have a laser pointer, but that's okay. Oh, I've got one here. Let's do this. I've got a little gizmo, and there we go. So what you can see here, this is Alaska, this is the Bering Sea, and then Russia over here. So this is called the minimum sea ice extent. what a lot of people, there's a lot of things that are confusing here. For one thing, you know, this crowd's not confused, but obviously there's no penguins up here. Sometimes I have to point that out. This is also the Arctic as opposed to the Antarctic, where ice can be hundreds of meters thick, right? The polar ice. Here, thick old age ice is maybe 5 meters. So that's about the height of the screen there. About 15 feet. That's old ice. So it's floating like a lily pad on top of the Arctic Ocean. If you imagine, if you mess just the slightest bit with the temperature, it's a very dynamic balance. It's kind of like, you know, if you get a drink and you pour in warm Coke versus cold Coke, how long your ice is going to last is highly dependent on the temperature coming in. Well, this is the minimum. So there's two things we can measure about sea ice. Its minimum extent, that is, in a year's cycle, what's the smallest that it contracts? So we can see that from satellites. This is actually a mosaicked image. And so we can see how far it contracts, also how thick it is. So we have two measures, extent and thickness. So in 1980, this area here is called Prudhoe Bay. That's where I do my work, where I think you can see a little thing. And they were really concerned when they were building the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and all of Prudhoe Bay's infrastructure, whether they could bring stuff up and get it to Prudhoe Bay, because the ice, oftentimes in the 70s and prior to that, it never retracted from the coast. Several of the large facilities at Prudhoe Bay are actually boats. It's pretty striking. You go out there and here's this big facility. It's got a keel and motor and propellers underneath of gravel. They just built gravel around these things. So they were boats, and they were worried they could get them in there because it was so close. And then now the most current stuff, and we can see here that we have about 400 to 500 miles of open water between North Shore of Alaska and this ice cap. So it has contracted significantly. So I tell my friends, you know, we can talk about climate change. I'm not a meteorologist or one of those people, but I know for a fact that this is an unprecedented amount of loss of ice, and we can see that it's very much real. You've probably seen this, but if you haven't, I'm going to play it. This is the same data, only a little more dramatic. What we have here, this is the North Pole right here, where these two axes intercept, and then I have labeled here Alaska, Siberia, and on around. And so we have these red things represent the actual position of NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration buoys they put on the ice, and then the trails, you'll see them moving. The black squares are where they were, and it tracks them. But what I want you to pay attention to, we're starting in September of 1979. On this scale here, white is the multi-year ice. That's ice that never melted. It's maybe 15 feet thick, 5 meters. And then the navy on this end is obviously open water. But look at how it changes over the years from what we have here to what's currently the case. I think it's gonna go, please play. You know, I love technology. Oh, so let's see if we can get this guy to go. Oh, it says it's playing it, but I don't see it playing it. So I will win over this machine. These machines argue with me once in a while. Oops, so I'm gonna go over here. Oops, because in spite of Microsoft, I will make this work. Let's see here. Let's see if we can get it to go there. It doesn't want to play. So let's try, maybe if I hit the next thing. I'm sorry. We tried this out before we started, and it ran just fine. So, well, that's not going to play. So let's drop it. We'll go back to it. It shows you that ice getting smaller and smaller and smaller till it's just about a quarter of what it is now. These are 4 radio tag polar bears off the coast of Alaska. And what they're doing here in this image, you can see how as the months progress, September and so forth, they're following the ice edge out. And what this is demonstrating is that polar bears don't just live on ice, but they select a very special type of ice, which is near the water-ice interface. And that's because their main prey, 95% of their diet is ring seals, and they are going to where the ring seals haul out, So that's where they are. They're tracking that ice edge. So it's very, very important for them to be able to hunt in order to eat a seal. The average polar bear, it varies, but about 43 seals a year, and that is enough. And all they eat, they're basically lipivores. They eat Andy DeRoche from University of Alberta called them lipivores because they basically eat the fat. They leave the lean body mass of the seal, and they just eat the fat and so forth. But you can see these guys are really tied to that. And you know what? That's probably foolish. I'm going to see why that is not running is kind of troubling to me. I think we're just not going to get it, but I'll try one more time. Oh, there we go. So, okay, this is the animation. You can see up here it's months and years, but try to get a kind of a feel for the amount of the white, which is the old age ice, and how far so it's contracting and expanding over each year. It's really a fast animation, but you'll see kind of over time, we're into 2000 now, so the ice is getting all the way out when it's winter, but it's contracting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we're up to 2010, and now at this point, at 2010, and it's continued this. You can see there's almost no old age ice, and you can also see over to Alaska, if we slowed it down, that it hardly ever even left Alaska. So this is the situation. It would be very much akin to, let's say we had a farm pond that had water to the rim, and then over the years or months, let's say you have a drought and it just keeps going down, and you see those concentric rings, and it's maybe June, there's no water in the forecast, and the water's getting smaller and smaller. Those fish are in big trouble. Nobody would suggest that they can evolve legs or a way to walk away. That's kind of silly. And yet for us as polar bear biologists, suggesting that they can just move onto the land is about equally as silly. And we'll talk about, it's kind of weird. It's like panda bears. I mean, what's wrong with these animals? Why don't they just go eat something else instead of bamboo? Stupid bears. But that's what they do, and they will just simply die. And we can say what we want, but that's what happens to them. And these guys are no different. And if you notice endangered species, if you take a look around the zoo and you talk to people, they have a couple traits in common. But one is usually a very narrow niche, a habitat type that they have to have, oftentimes tied to a very specialized food source. With the panda, it's bamboo. With these guys, it's ring seals. They can't catch them in the water. They're just big blubbery bears. I can outswim these guys. I haven't done it. I don't want to do it. But, you can outswim. Brown bears I've outswam before. They're just kind of these big, these kind of dog paddle, but they can dog paddle a long, long time. So I've had brown bears that we had radio tags that swam 21 miles offshore of Alaska. This is a polar bear lecture, I'm sorry, but it's a good story. So these brown bears would go out and just ravage bird colonies. It was like, looks like one of those old Japanese Godzilla movies. They walk out there, this thing, and they're eating all the puffins and everything, and then they swim back. All their scats are really cool. They look like shuttlecocks for badminton because they're just all feathers, and there's a few dazed puffins walking around after this. So they can really go. Polar bears can swim probably even farther. But my point is, if sea ice continues to climb, these polar bears are going to have to either adopt new strategies. And one we're seeing is that they're moving in mass off of the sea ice onto the land to den. So why? Because if any of you have been foolish enough, like me, to walk onto a lake that only has ice about this thick, it's really not good. You can feel it move, and it's unsettling. And these bears are out there. They can tell old age ice. I mean, it moves. The new stuff is thin. They're not going to den up there to have their cubs, so they move onto the land. So that's one thing we're seeing. And the question I get a lot is, why don't they can just move on the land, heck with them. Well, we already have that experiment. What that is called is the barren ground grizzly right here. That's what a polar bear would look like living on the ground. It's about a third the size. It's very small, but the trouble is that niche is already filled. It already has that bear there. Now, somebody could say, well, the polar bear can push them off. They could, but the other problem is that bear is that size because that's all that the environment will support. If we take that bear and put him on coastal Alaska with access to salmon, they get gigantic, but that's not the situation. It's kind of like I'll leave black bears out of this, but we could throw Skittles on the landscape here and there, and a little squirrel could live off of those really well. And a bear might like eating them, but there's not enough to support something that big. And this is Skittles stuff. They can't live on this. You can't grow a 800 kilogram animal on grass and berries. It doesn't work. You get these little guys. So basically that's not an option. Nobody in the polar bear world or the bear world would even think that was possible. But I mentioned this. What we have here is, and I need to update it because the data are much more convincing now, but what it is we have this data that shows down here these triangular icons are for polar bears that we had radio tags on. And for the decade from 1982 to 91, I know you don't, unless you're, what do they call them, a savant? I don't know what they call them now. They're not high functioning, but they could look at that and tell you exactly how many squares are there. But I'll tell you, there's 66% are off of the coast of Alaska. They're denning on the sea ice. The circles are the next decade up through the mid-2000s. 66% are now on the land. So we have very good data that show they are moving. It's not safe and sound for them. What's also pretty cool about these animals is because you saw how the pack ice moves, it's moving all the time. And when a bear goes in, let's say, anywhere out on the ocean, they might come out 600 miles from where they went in. They come out, they have their cubs, and then they wander back to within just a few miles, typically, of where they went in. So they're doing some kind of celestial navigation. The reason why I'm involved in this is because at a time when polar bears are having a hard time with denning there, they move into the narrow band of coastal Alaska. This is the group I work with. But that's when we're getting more oil exploration than ever. When oil went up to $100 a barrel, believe you me, they're finding new ways of getting residual oil out. So the Prudhoe Bay oil fields were expected only to last like 30 years. But now with new technology like fracking, they're getting oil out of here, and it's crazy. When I started this work 13 years ago, there was hotel rooms all over the place. Now you cannot get one because they've got thousands of people up here trying to extract more oil. Well, that's when the polar bears are coming in, and so we have this potential overlap. Well, we have an overlap of polar bears wanting a safe place to have their cubs and oil industry exploring more than ever. So that's a problem, potentially. So here's a picture of a mom with a couple cubs. People sometimes ask me, well, big deal. Why study their denning ecology? But what's interesting about these guys is that, big carnivores like a polar bear is most of the year, if there's something that bothers them, they just walk away. I mean, they're really risk-averse animals. You don't get to be a big bear, an old bear, by doing stupid things. So when they see like humans in their trucks and stuff, they just go the other way, But when they're in a den and they are having their cubs, that reproductive effort, these two little cubs, represent the whole game, And so they can't just get up and leave. When they weigh a kilogram or two, the weather will kill them. So they have to stay put. And when we put them in positions where there's a lot of risk, then we can risk losing their cubs. They'll just abandon them and leave them to die. What's really amazing, and that's the fun part about biology, and I think all the people that work in the zoo, and probably most of you, the digger you deep, the more complicated it is. It's very fascinating. These mothers, by the way, they intrinsically know. This is bizarre. If they're a young mother, they will much more quickly abandon cubs when there's a concern than a very old mother. And that was a bit of an enigma, but why that is, what we think, and it seems to make sense evolutionarily, if you're a young mother and you have a pair of cubs, but you have 4 or 5 unborn litters, then it's okay to sacrifice those cubs because you're preserving yet unborn generations to come forth. If you're an old mother and you've kind of had all your litters, then it makes sense to stay with them and just ride it out, and that's what they do. So the question is, how do they know that? But they do know that, so it's pretty cool. How we find these bears is always a question people have, and on this picture here, I'd like to share with you briefly some of the objectives. So the objectives when I started this was to observe and describe what these bears are doing at their dens, recently emerged bears. The reason was there's a lot of concern. Once the bears were listed in 2009 as under the Endangered Species Act as threatened due to habitat loss, the stakes became higher for monitoring all of our human activities around them. So we can't infer what a disturbed animal is unless we know what normal is. So in this case, we were trying to document that. Not surprisingly, nobody's done much of this work, because it's cold. They just alter denning. I mean, so some bears come out and they're there at their den for a day. Some are there for a month. Some of them do different things, and so we've tried to look at variables that account for why they do what they do. Also, we've looked at any time humans and bears interact. We've tried to better understand that, and so that was also a part of it. And then also, I've spent time exploring technologies for locating dens. So I don't know, it's been a lot of fun and very illuminating, but that's why we're there. So let's take a look here really quickly at this. Dens are located, we find them a variety of ways. Well, you have a white bear on a white landscape that basically is underground and doesn't want to be found. So that does create some problems, but we can find them by tracking bears that are wearing transmitters. That's obviously the best way to find them. We can also use what's called forward-looking infrared. The beginning of this talk, there was that kind of fuzzy picture. That's located on an aircraft, and we can fly over vast amounts of landscape looking for warm spots in the snow. So we've done that. It's very expensive, so we've also used Karelian bear dogs to find them. We let the dogs, we take them out there, and they sniff around, and they're a lot of fun, those things. And then we've used Handheld Flare to locate dens. The same thing that's on the airplane, but we can hold it like a video camera, and it's still an expensive device, like about $75,000, but it's a lot cheaper than the ones on the airplane and the airplane time. Just a real quick visit here. The USGS in Alaska handles bears to every year. I've gone out with them, and what happens, I mean, I work for them. And so what we would do is go out and we'd capture up to 100 to 150 polar bears, and we would then measure everything about them, but also outfit them with transmitters, and then we're able to track them with satellites and know where they are and what they're doing. You know, before the advent of radio collars, they thought they were just wandering animals, that they just wandered around the Arctic. You know, a Russian bear is pretty soon an American bear, and then it's a Greenland bear. They don't do that. They actually have a lot of fidelity to a particularly country, you know. So they stick to those countries pretty much. Their home ranges can range up to 20,000 square kilometers, which is much bigger than this state. 200,000. I mean, it's bigger than the state. We'll leave it at that. And so radio telemetry has been a very big aid to understanding this animal. That on there, that's called a FLIR. It's mounted on the belly of a helicopter, and they're about $500,000. But if I get time on the helicopter, we can use that to locate them. These bears, like for instance, here's a bear in its den in the spring. And between late October and early November, these pregnant bears seek suitable drifts. Now up there, people say, what's it like? And I just pull a piece of paper out of a computer printer and lay it down and say on the desktop and say, there's a 3D map of the North Slope. It's pretty much what it is. It's just flat, but you get 2 meters of elevation. The snow will drift in, and these guys will be there. It's pretty neat. I mean, you would never think there's a bear underground. I've actually walked over their dens before and then said, we should turn the FLIR on, and the whole thing's glowing, and stupid thing to do, but I didn't expect a bear to be there. So they go in there and they seek these snowbanks between late October and early November. They're pregnant, which is, again, I guess we all take it for granted, but I mean, how do these bears know they're pregnant? You know, they're walking around with basically a one-celled or a fertilized egg. And they go, oh, I'm carrying an egg. I guess I better go find a den. I don't know how they do that. But non-pregnant bears don't. Now, this is an image from the FLIR. Actually, the FLIR has a true color, you know, regular video camera. So what you're seeing here, which is a little bit hard to recognize, but this is sea ice. We're looking at it obliquely at an angle. This is an island off the coast, and it's there's a little bit of polygonal tundra you can kind of see, but it's a wind-blown snow type. I did my master's degree on caribou, and I just can't get out of the cold, I guess. It was winter foraging behavior of caribou. Thought I'd get enough of it then, but I didn't. And so working at 40 below zero. And this is all bare island. It's tundra, tussock tundra, little tiny plants about this high, not much snow. Then what we have is here, you can see the big drifts. This is snow that's drifted in, And that's bare sea ice right there. So this is a snowbank on the sea ice, and this is patches of bare snow right there. Then we'll go to that same, so that there's a den site there, but it's not visible if it's covered by snow. But now if we go to the FLIR image right here, you can actually see that's the same bank with black being colder than light. And what we have here is the den right there, which you can see because of this bright signature of heat coming out of there. So the FLIR is fairly useful. You can see this little dot right there. And somebody asked me the other day, they said, how do you know that's not an Arctic fox? Well, if I find a 200-kilogram Arctic fox, I'll probably start studying that thing too. I mean, they're little bitty things, so they don't put off that circle there is probably 3 meters around, so it's quite big, indicating there's a large mass under the snow. So then we know that that's a place where we can find them. A couple things, this handheld flare, we've also used that. That's one there, and there's an image of a bear. It gives the temperature across their body, and there's another bear watching. And so we will get a signature off of, I don't see them like that, turn it on. It's pitch black out there when we're out there, and we always turn it on and worry about that kind of image. Be kind of fun to put it in there for my coworker. Here, see if there's anything around here. It'd be pretty excited. We do some naughty things like that out there, but they've got guns on them, so it's usually not a good idea. We did do some research recently where we did artificial dens. This is where being a naturalist is helpful. So we go in the dens and we measure everything. So when we wanted to try to figure out what's the best operational window for these handheld units, we were able to reconstruct dens. Again, this is with zoo support. I got a couple technicians up there, and we dug these dens, and then we would use the FLIR on them. Those are artificial dens in a snowbank. Not a great image, but you can see the heat loss through the snowbank. And then we were able to create a window. For instance, any den wall over 90 centimeters, it's too thick. It's like a really thick thermos bottle. It doesn't let any heat out, so you can't see them. If the wind is over 8 miles an hour, you can't see it. It just whisks the heat away, and all these kind of things. So it was a bit of research to figure out what's the best place to do it. And I think, that's the most recent paper that we put out was on this. It's in Bioscience, and it's about the efficacy of flare, the kind of things that affect it. And there's BJ so we go in these dens and we'll measure things. And so it does lead to a better understanding of how we can detect these animals. Fish and Game, that's Fish and Wildlife Service and ADFG. They use these Karelian bear dogs, which we work with. And they bring those out on the study, and those dogs will walk around. I mean, it's like 40 below zero, and their little tails wag, and I would think it would just go crack and fall to the ground. But they do. They're crazy animals. They just run around. And then when they see, they pick up the scent, they alert, they tap their paws and they point to the den, and they're just really good. But you can't do a lot of terrain with these dogs. I mean, they're pretty limited. But it is another technique. Another thing that we're doing right now, which represents a new technology, this is really kind of, Wes Larson's a graduate student of mine. Here's this picture again. And we're using synthetic aperture radar. This is really exciting. That's a really crummy image, but what it is created an image of a target, that's a landscape. And because a polar bear is basically a 200 kilogram sack of warm salt water, that's, me too, less than 100 kilograms, but okay, 100 kilograms, we'll leave it at that. And if you suspend that in a frozen matrix of ice and you hit it with radar, it lights up. So we're using, and it's weather independent. The other thing that's really cool about that is in our preliminary work that's done by the company we're working with, you can take a human at a couple hundred meters and you can sense them with radar, and you can actually see the heartbeat in the radar's image. So, I mean, it's weird stuff, but we're doing some research with this, and potentially we'll be able to not only find bears, but also monitor their stress level based on heart rate, which is a good indicator of stress. So we keep doing this. Trying different technologies. This is just a little bit of where my study is on the north slope of Alaska here. These little stringer barrier islands, these have been here since the whaler days of the late 1800s. Those islands right now are losing 30 meters a year. And the reason is with the sea ice being as it pulls back, now you have open ocean, which is called fetch, it can now build waves that are just blowing these islands away. So these have been here since 100 plus years, and they're disappearing really fast because of changes up there. But that's where we do the work, is at a lot of the islands and on the beach. You saw this in the other image, but I started out, because I studied black bears and brown bears, we do it in blinds a lot of times. We've had so much fun with those bears. A study that I just finished was we presented about 2,000 trials with free-ranging grizzly bears to see how they respond to sight, sense, and sound associated with human activity. And so we'd be in blinds and we'd try different things and see what they think. Well, you can go up here and do it with tents, which we did. We put up white tents. The problems are, though, if you have a big lens sticking outside at 50 below and you bring it in, and inside the tent it's like 10 above, the lens goes crack, because it's too much of a contrast, so that's no fun. And then it's just really cold. We sit in there, we had a saying, what happens in the tent stays in the tent, in case everybody gets a little too cold, but anyway, it never got to that. So so I tried this for a couple years. We had oil stoves and things. You just grab the thing, try to shove the oil stove down your coat. It is really cold. So we did this, these guys here at Eskimo Island in 2003, it's been a while, they spent 3 weeks out there in that tent, and I don't ever hear from them ever. They're still friends, but they thought that was cruel and inhuman punishment. So I devised this remote camera systems, and now we use these Igloo Coolers that we put, as you can see in the video, these high-def security cameras in there, and that's it's just beautiful working up there. That's a picture of BJ. But we carry this little pod behind us too. It's a little, it's heated, and if we need it to be, so if we get really cold, we can climb in there and get out of the weather. So snow machines. Now some of the data that come out of this are, like right here, we have, this is what it looks like when you have, this is just a piece of the data, but on the left side, those are individual dens here, and it shows the emergence date and how long they were there and when they left the site. So you can see there's kind of a mean date of when they come out and a mean date of when they leave. These are dates down here. So you at least start to understand a little bit about what their normal patterns of den emergence is. And again, the mother comes out, she hasn't eaten for probably 4 or 5 months. And so they're starving, but they don't leave. Some of these stay there for almost 3 weeks. And they have every reason to go get food, but they don't go because they're watching those cubs. They want them to develop motor skills, moving around. I mean, these are just little tiny, maybe 3 or 4 kilogram bears, and so they're moving around. They're developing the ability to run around on the ice. They bond one to another, which is crucial, especially with brown bears. I see that a lot, where if the cubs go off from the mother, that's where, like at Brooks Camp or McNeil River, where there's a large aggregation, the other bears will just kill them. So that bond and listening to your mother, that's a message here, is that you'll get killed by a bear if you don't. And anyway, they get that social bond. The other thing that they do is they also are growing. So the mother's milk fat, as I said, was 30 to 32% milk fat. That's like drinking microwave butter sticks. It's just pure fat. And so you can build bear really fast on that stuff. So it's kind of like the mom's like a big balloon, and these are little balloons, and the air is getting smaller here and they're getting bigger here, transferring the nutrients across. By the way, when they eat a seal, which is pretty amazing, 96% of the fat on the seal goes directly into the fat of the polar bear. So it's a very efficient transfer mechanism. So anyway, in those dens, we've been looking at den emergence dates and how those vary. There's a bear in a snowbank. They're just really cool. We get up there, and my crew a couple years ago, the Fish and Wildlife Service asked if I would send my crew over to investigate a den, so they went over there. And before we go in the den, we really don't know what's in there. We've crawled in there before, and there'd be a little Arctic fox in there. It's kind of exciting because they're little, but they got teeth. And so you get away, but and then you're like the cork in a bottle, because these guys, even though they weigh a couple 100 kilograms, I don't know what they do. They're like hairy octopuses or something. They go through that hole. I have to take my coat off, and we generally have to get that off and then go in, but I don't like it. It's really kind of, I don't like tight spaces, so it's a little creepy in there. So I usually throw my graduate students in first. Go on in, it's fine, it's fine. So we did that one day, and the bear was in there. And so my student was a little excited because the bear stuck its face out about that far from his foot. And he was digging to open up the entrance, and we were told the bear wasn't there. So, but what's pretty neat, if you want to know about polar bears, in this respect, I have a bit of other work I do is about bear-human conflict. And in 140 years of Alaska history, we've only had 2 polar bear-inflicted fatalities, only 2. And both of those people, in my opinion, were pretty much asking for it. One guy was completely drunk. It's not a good thing to do, is stagger through a bunch of polar bears. And it cost him his life. And the other person, it was really amazing. He had a double barrel flintlock. This is 1883, and he tried to shoot one. And the first barrel went off and hit the bear, and the second one didn't work, and the bear's paws didn't misfire, and that was the end of him. So so you've all probably heard they stalk and they hunt humans. Well, they need a new job description. I think they've done a really lousy job of doing that. In Canada, 7 polar bear deaths. So we have 9 for the continent in 130 years, or 40. And I don't think they've deserved that label, stalker killers. If I had to be stuck somewhere, I'd pick that bear over black or brown. I wouldn't want to be there, but they're not innately hunting humans. They have no interest. Now, if we put you in a little SEAL suit and threw you out there, that could be interesting. Brown bears are much, much, much more dangerous. Now, some will say, oh, that's baloney. We know there's few people. Oh, there's a lot of people. In the villages of Kaktovik, Point Lay, Barrow, of course, Churchill, there's a lot of bears. If they were hunting humans, we'd see a different numbers on the scoreboard there, but they don't. Again, they're wild animals. They're potentially dangerous. I don't turn my back on them. As a general rule, being a bear biologist, I don't let hairy, 4-legged animals make significant decisions for my life. So I don't give them any kind of control over me. But is it innate? Is it their natural thing to take humans down? Now, they don't want anything to do with you, which is pretty cool. It's overblown. I think we just love our little monsters, our stories and things, but they're oftentimes not very true. Now, this is something I alluded to that's come out of our research. And what we see here, and this is really important, when we look at, so this is 77 dens here, 30 dens, and 32. We have a new data set that we've analyzed that now triples those data. It's over 1,000 dens. And what we're finding is in the 1980s, the mean date of entrance was November 6th, and the mean stay was 146 days for these bears, leaving April 1st. When we jump up to the next decade, we see that we've now down to, we're up to, it's only 4 days later, and it's a few days later, earlier here. So this is 137 days. So it's only 9 days less that they're spending in a den. But now when we jump into that period, you can see the ice shrinking. We have them going in November 13th and coming out March 16th, 122 days. That's 3.5 weeks less time these bears are spending in a den. It's not because, that's significant. That means that these animals are dealing with an increasingly bad situation. It's not the only data, but this is the one chunk of the world I deal with. That is very significant. It's what biologists do is what a doctor does if you're not feeling good. They will try and figure it out by sampling your blood, looking at other aspects. They weigh you, they take your blood pressure. There's other things we do with bears. We do similar things, but we also look at habits, If if you had a plexiglass roof on your house and I could spy on you, oh, he's spending way too much time in the bathroom, this guy's got a problem, It's kind of a nasty metaphor, sorry. But with with bears, we kind of spy on them and we try to see what they're doing. That's one of the spy things. We can see they're not in the den as long as they historically have been. And here's the interpretation. Because of that ice being 400 miles off, these females can't get to the land, so they have to wait till it refreezes, so they show up later. They're coming into those dens in poor condition. We know this because we're measuring their body condition as they come out. We handle 150 a year. We can pretty accurately measure that. They're not in good condition or as good. I could show you a graph, but it's declining. Then also, if they're leaving early, that's because they simply don't have the fat reserves to stay as long as they'd like. They've got to either leave or just die. So these animals here on the slope are leaving earlier and are taking the cubs out. Cub survival, you know, it's not a happy story, but I'm just saying, for researchers, we find this all very, you know, interesting. We see multiple lines of evidence that suggest that the population in the Beaufort Sea is stressed. These are some of the den work. Look at that guy's feet over there. I hate that. I just get in there and you get stuck. You can strip your clothes off, but it's really not fun because you get really stuck in there. So I dig them out. I dig a big hole. Big hole. I jump down in there. I remember I was out there with this woman from University of Alaska, where I also did my master's degree, and she was giving me it was kind of interesting talk about how men have dominated the world and all this, and it's true. I mean, what am I going to say? So she was really giving it to me good. I don't know, we were having a fun time, and so we got to the den, and I said, I heard everything you say, ladies first. Yeah, that was cool, man. She had nowhere to go but in that hole. So we go in the dens, and we excavate them. One of the things that's really neat, this is what it looks like when you use FLIR. That's a big snowbank, and actually with the heat coming through the drift, you can see where the main chamber is, and all these other tunnels. It's kind of like a several 100-pound version of Uncle Milton's ant farm. They're in there kind of crawling around. I've crawled in there. This is the same den that we excavated. It had 4 different entrances. This is after they've awakened. The mom's waiting for the cubs to get mobile enough to leave, and they're just digging tunnels, and it's really fun to watch them. I mean, there's snow flying out of here and there. It's kind of neat, kind of like the little chutes and ladders game those guys do. They dig all over. Now, one other thing that I've done, I don't want to talk all night about this, but we also monitor what's going on with humans and bears on the slope. And in this case, we've been collecting data on that. Now, what's interesting, it shouldn't be this is a small data set that I published. We have a much larger one now. But what's interesting about these 2 dens here, Flaxman and Bullen Point, these are just 6 dens. But the black and the gray bars, just suffice to say that that's an index of how much vigilance and behaviors that are indicative. So when bears come out of their den and they look around, they go like this, and they just stare at something, that's a vigilant stare. Also, how much time they spend doing that. So these 2 dens, these were right near industrial activity. There was a road that was built on, they didn't know those dens were there, and those bears are very close to 100-ton trucks. And so we see them not paying attention to anything, whereas these are bears in pristine areas, and they're always doing this, looking around. And so what we see is what we expect from an intelligent animal, that they habituate, they cease to pay attention to stimuli that don't mean anything, like a truck. It's like, oh, there goes another giant snow block with tires on it, or something. I don't know what they think, but they don't pay attention. So kind of cool stuff. It doesn't mean it's okay to have 100-ton trucks running by dens, but it does suggest that these are, when you're a smart animal like that and nothing hurts you, they just kind of zero it out. So anyway, that was kind of fun to look at that. Now, here's some bears. This Dan Crosby that shot this, he said that was a real picture. But I talked to him. He says, yeah, I shot that photo. That's the bears over there in Svalbard is where that is. So the question really is, what does the future hold for these bears? And I think that, we're yet to see exactly where this is going to go. I see that the head of the, what would it be? The IUCN put out a paper today. They're releasing the ICPP? The IPCC. I'm trying to think and talk at the same time. It's really difficult. So the IPCC is releasing their new report, and they're more certain than ever that it's anthropogenic or human source of CO2 that's causing the problems that we're seeing. And I think that Dr. Steve Amstrup released a report that was in Nature last year, which is a journal of science and a highly esteemed one, where, this ice relationship to the land or to the water is an extremely dynamic. We don't have to get rid of all CO2, but if we can just trim it back a little bit, the ice will respond dynamically. I believe most of the people right now see some large reductions in numbers of bears. In Hudson Bay, where I've been many times, we're looking at 25% of those bears are gone. It went from the high of 1,200 down to less than 900. The southern Beaufort Sea, those are on the decline. And for the other populations, we really don't have good data. I mean, Russia doesn't spend anything on polar bear monitoring at all, and it's huge. And so they really don't know what's going on there. And so it goes on around the northern countries. It's pretty sketchy stuff. But where we do have good data, we see some problems. I would say that the prediction that they'll go extinct isn't out there, but that they'll remain as very small relictual populations in pockets where they can make a living is going to happen if we don't see this turn around. What's exciting to me, though, is humans are pretty smart. They walk down the wrong path occasionally and make mistakes, but I have faith that we've got some very bright people globally working on this problem, and I'm pretty excited. I think we're going to see some good things, but for right now, these are an animal that need our attention. So with that, I'll close and open it up for questions if you'd like. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about the consistency of your finding about the reduction in den time
Yeah.
around the Arctic Circle. The graphic earlier in your presentation about the reduction in sea ice extent from 1980 to
Right.
2012 made it look like that was more pronounced above Alaska and eastern Siberia than above Canada and western Europe.
And
Have there been similar findings about den time reduction?
nobody's studying it. So one of the things I have as a graduate student who has created a computer model, they do collar bears in those other areas. And one of the difficulties, if you look at these collars, they provide 5 different streams of data, such as obviously movement data, signal quality, it's some measure of how good the signal is, because that's linked to how good the location is, temperature, and activity, so temperature at the collar, and so anyway, we can take these different streams and apply a computer algorithm and feel fairly comfortable that when it hits a certain threshold, that bear is in a den, and when it comes back out, it's out of the den. I mean, when it raises to a certain point, it's out of the den. It's not a real simple. Sometimes it's great. You can just see the temperature really cold, and then it jumps up, and then it's like that for 3 months, and then it goes down. That happens, but most of the data are a lot messier. So it's a combination of signal, quality, and all that. But my point is, he's got that completed now, so we have applied that to the Alaska data. And that will be applied to the Hudson Bay data, and beyond there's not a lot of other data. So I think we'll see a similar thing for Hudson Bay, but we don't know. So that all those data I presented were just Alaska, based on individuals looking at the data and going, that's in the den, that's out of the den. So we needed something a little more consistent than that. So we haven't published it yet because we're waiting for those. But anyway, we'll know. Yeah. Yeah, well, so I published a paper on infanticide a couple years ago that kind of stirred things up a little bit. It wasn't intended to, but it came out at the same time when the MMS, Mineral Management Services, Chuck, what's that guy's last name? He'll come to me. I guess this is what getting old is like. I don't know. Anyway, Chuck Monet, and they had found bears dead along the beaches, right, in Alaska. They fly a transect. Here you have a white animal on a brown beach. They're really easy to count. And so they were flying, but they were finding dead bears washed up. And they did some necropsies and found they just ran out of gas trying to swim 400 miles. At the same time I came up with, I had documented a den that was crushed into. Now, bear cannibalism is not uncommon in the bear species, but in between Ian Sterling of Canada and Stephen Anstrup of the U.S., they had 80 years of time out in the field. They'd never seen it. Well, we documented 4 cases in 2009, and then since then in Svalbard, we've seen a lot more. So yes, we are seeing that. And that's another thing biologists look for is, one of the most dangerous things you can do is kill another bear. They're very dangerous animals, backed in a corner. And so typically they don't do that. But not only were they killing them, they were killing them and eating them. So a lot of times in brown bears, we'll see them kill, but they don't eat them. These guys are eating them. So we did document that, and we were afraid that is kind of happening. As far as this other issue that you brought up, which was this hybridization, of course, it's in the news. We've got 4 of those now. They call them Prisleys or Growlers. They're obviously these big white bears with little panda eyes. Clearly, they didn't get into the bamboo patch, so they're messing around with grizzly bears. And so we do have the hybrids. We'd seen it in the National Zoo in, I think, the 1940s, was that? They had them on display, a polar and a grizzly, and then the grizzly came into heat, and the polar bear bred her, and they got this kind of Appaloosa-looking bear. And so they found, and in fact, I think Steve was pointing out that that's where they had to reevaluate. It was Thalarctos as a genus, and they put them back into Ursus because they could hybridize. And so we've seen those other ones that have been capped. 2 have been. This happens. Certainly, it's not a solution. There goes the polar bear if this interbreeding takes place. But we see it. I think if you could sample specimens of brown and blacks in museums, you'd find a lot of hybrid. There's a lot of stuff going on in the woods, that we don't know about. And I think these black and browns, they have their little, whatever. And so I think it happens on that species too. It's just really in your face on polars because you can't miss the extra genes. They found their claws were different. Their muzzles were different, their coloration. So we know that, and they tested the DNA, so. Anybody else? How about you, this young lady?
What's an estimate about how much bears would polar bears would you say about all left in the wild?
Well, it's just a total shoot from the hip, but it's around 20 to 25,000, which sounds like a really lot of bears. And, I'll have people come up and say, well, there's no reason to worry. But when their habitat's going away like that, there's a lot of reason to worry. That's why they got listed in the U.S. They're not listed under, COSEWIC, and the Canada's Endangered Species Act is COSEWIC, and they're not listed there. It's been a contentious issue. One of my colleagues called the premier a Neanderthal on the national news. I thought, boy, that's great. He's going to get in trouble for that, but he's in a university where he's kind of protected. He was a little upset because it seems the evidence is very obvious these animals are having trouble. But so there's some numbers. When somebody tells you that they're stable to increasing, they're not scientists. They're just not. And that's the other thing. You guys know this. If you want to know something, don't watch a talk show. It's interesting and it's entertaining, but these guys are just cherry picking to get an issue. I love listening to some of these people, but, there's several of the conservative talk show hosts here in America. They're probably very good people, but they're just idiots when it comes to polar bears. Whatever. I'm not sure I have agenda, but I know they do. And because the data are quite different than that. And it's just, so don't believe that. Again, you want to know about climate change? Read the stuff by the meteorologists. They eat, drink, and sleep. That's their job. Unless you believe in there being a global conspiracy, which unfortunately some people do, then there's no reason for them to be making this stuff up. But again, we can leave all that alone. We don't have to go down the path. We can look at what's going on in the Arctic. It's a problem. I don't care what you attribute it to. It is a problem. Yes, in the back there. That. What was going on was, it's interesting because back in the day when they explored on these barrier islands for oil, they have a byproduct. It's a bentonite clay stuff they use, and it gets all kinds of solution in it. So ExxonMobil back then, and it was acceptable practice, they dug great big, they're called reserve pits, and they dumped this stuff in there. Well, they saw the islands are disappearing, and that was quickly going to end up in the ocean. They spent millions of dollars to haul all of that out of there, and so keep it from going in the Arctic Ocean. By the way, I do find the major oil companies that I work with is very responsible partners, so I don't have a gripe with them. They fund our work. they seem to just be fine with whatever we find. They don't try to exert an influence in any way. I'm very proud of that in that respect. But back to this, I think that so these big trucks, they're driving on ice roads. You know, they build these roads that cost about $1 million a mile out of ice, and then come spring they melt. And these ice roads go by polar bear dens. And so when the dens opened up, they didn't know they were there. The bears had come out, and they just sit there watching these trucks go by, back and forth. And, you know, I mean, again, if it doesn't hurt them, they just habituate to it. And that's what was going on there. And I don't know. And so once, you know, once they found out that they were there, they have suspended all traffic. In fact, they've, last bear that happened to was on Foggy Island. It's called, this is where my students went in there and ran into the bear. But they actually shut down the road entirely and rerouted 17 miles at a cost of $17 million to go around that polar bear den. And but there was no traffic. I can't imagine what that cost those companies to do that, but they didn't really have a say in it. The Fish and Wildlife Service came in and said, nope, there's a bear. So that's why I'm looking at other technologies, ways to detect them so that we don't have that kind of problem. Because you know what that means? They just turned the price up, and we just paid for that ice road. So, you know, pass it on to the consumer.
Have you thought of taking some of these detection devices, the FLIR, the SAR, and getting small enough to put on drones and cut down the cost?
Yeah, the problem we have with drones, he said, have we thought about putting these on drones? Oh yeah, my brother, as it turns out, is the head of the drone program for British Petroleum. So we talk a little about that, but the FAA doesn't allow drones on the United States at all, unless you're trying to spy on somebody, I guess, but they don't. So, you know, but the FAA just signed a new document that in 2014 will allow drone use, and so we'll be using them, yes, to do that. But otherwise, private aircraft owners don't like the idea of unmanned aircraft flying around in their airspace. So that's been the holdup. But yeah, drones is the way to go for sure. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You can.
I was going to ask you, when you go out for your evaluation for polar bears, when you give them the sleeping medicine for the anesthesia, you know, the calming, what was the largest polar bear for your weight, do you remember? And what was the largest amount of baby polar bear cubs that you've seen?
Oh, so you all heard that. The largest one I've ever sat on was about a 900-pounder, which is not a big one. The largest on record is about 1,700 pounds weighed. Anything bigger than that, and it's just people making up stories. As far as cubs, 4 cubs is the most I've ever seen. They're almost certainly doomed to die, several. In most bear species, cub mortality is huge, usually 60%. That'd be 2 out of 3. And it's just nature's way of making sure one of them gets forward. But yeah, 4. We see 4 little. Yeah. If they get around them, that's why the mothers are always watching. Yep, they'll do that. And we actually I've done a lot more work with grizzlies in this respect, but we've captured grizzly bears. We had a 29-year-old that had 3 cubs, and she lost all her cubs, and then this was in the spring, but by fall she denned up and had cubs the next year. So we know that by her cubs disappearing, she went back into estrus, was bred again, and then, so the motivation seems to be there. Some of them kill them and eat them. Some of them just kill them, maybe to eliminate potential competition. Yeah.
Well, the females are denning. Where and when are the males doing?
Well, as I said in that one little clip, if you're born a male polar bear, you'll never den again. And that's because you can hunt seals year-round. So they're up in the Arctic, maybe 50 miles north of there or further in the leads hunting seals. So in bears, you know, hibernation is an adaptation. It has 2 roles. One is if you're a pregnant female, you can hibernate for the security of a den, a good warm place to bear cubs and so forth. So mothers will do it. But on the other hand, hibernation is a response to resource scarcity. But to test that hypothesis, just give them resources. And Steve and I were talking today in Kodiak. One of my college colleagues collared grizzly bears, and 70% of the males never den. They just kind of get lazy, and they'll go down to the beach, and if a seal washes up, they'll eat that. If a whale comes up, they'll all eat on that. If there's and again, like in Florida, black bears don't den. They're active year-round. You put a black bear in Alaska, and it sleeps all winter. So it's just a function of resources, and as long as there's seals to be caught, they're out there doing that. Hudson Bay is really weird because all the ice disappears. All bears end up on the beach. So those bears, this is amazing. Mid-July, they come off the ice. So every bear, big males, little moms and cubs, everything, and then they're there till the ice forms in November. If you are a mother that's pregnant, you're there July, August, September, October. Ice forms November. You go in a hole in the ground. You're still in there. It's December, January, February, March. They're in the den that many months. What was that? Almost 8 months that they haven't had a single thing to eat. And then they come out. So these are really amazing animals that they can do that. Yes. Supplementing them with food. Well, Andy DeRoche of Canada, Ian Sterling of Canada, Marty Obart of Canada, and some others have just written a paper about that, because what's happening is the ice period in Hudson Bay is it's breaking up sooner. Well, let's go the other way. It's forming later, so it's getting smaller here, and it's breaking up earlier. So we're not talking supplementing them for months. We're talking about making up for the loss of a few weeks. So they actually floated the idea of supplemental feeding of polar bears in the Hudson Bay area for a couple weeks, just to give them that little bit more to keep them going. That's pretty unattractive to a lot of people, but we do that a lot of places. I think maybe Steve pointed out Jackson Hole, Wyoming, they feed all those elk. It's tens of millions of dollars of tourism there. I think there's a vested interest in maybe doing that. So they floated the idea just so it's out there in case to. Yeah. No. Yeah. Oh, I think you're right. I mean, it's not a good outlook for this animal. And well, yeah, they're kind of, and that's the interesting thing, a very good point. I mean, collapse of the Arctic ecosystem is not just about polar bears, it's about a whole lot of other species, including ourselves. So there's a lot of concern. I think we have to try to stay positive and see what we can do. There's some very innovative ideas out there, but you're right, the time is short. We need to act on this. And yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's part of the trouble, though. You get all this bomb throwers from the sidelines about this and that, but a point that the public misses is when you have a debate about climate change on the news, it's like a split screen with somebody here and somebody here. Well, behind the scientists' side, the climatologists, there's about 500 of them saying this, that it's a problem over here, you got a few. So, it almost looks like a balanced debate. It's really not. Anyway, so you're right. I mean, he's pointing out the fact that polar bears are the least of our concerns, although we relate to them, and I'm really grateful for that because, like I've said, if the nudibranch was endangered, people go, who cares? But with a polar bear, people relate to this thing, and it becomes more important to them. And I know the zoo here, which is building this exhibit, will play an important role in trying to mobilize people to do something about this. So I think, I'm not just saying it because I'm here, but zoos play a very, very crucial role. I write these papers and maybe a couple hundred people read them. I'm under no impressions that it's, goes beyond that. But this environment here, we'll talk to 3 million people in a year or something. It's an amazing amount. So it's really, the pressure is on these people to translate my work into a message that has impact on the public. And we see the zoo network, when I grew up, zoos were just a cool place to go and see animals. But they've really become a research location. They're doing stuff around here with the polar bears we can't do in the wild and other species. But they also have that public interface. So I was very impressed with this zoo because they've hired some special talent to get that message, more effective. And but it's troubling. It's very troubling. Yeah.
By the way, tomorrow on NPR locally, there's a new program on 12 o'clock noon about climate change.
Okay. Yeah. NPR tomorrow at noon, a program. Very good.
My question might now be for both of you guys. How come it's, with all the polar bear cubs in trouble, why is it so difficult for the zoo here to get a polar bear cub or a youngster?
Well, Steve could probably address that better, but it's a lot to do with the Endangered Species Act, I think.
It has to do with that. The Endangered Species Act has to do with the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They're protected under both of those agencies. And it's not so much that we can't get a permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Endangered Species Act. We can get past that. The Marine Mammal Protection Act looks at the polar bear as a depleted species. And as a depleted species, you cannot take or remove an animal unless you have a recovery effort. And a recovery effort would mean that you have to create more sea ice or correct some of these problems that Dr. Smith was talking about. On the zoo side of it, we don't have a self-sustaining population of polar bears in our zoos. So I can tell you that all the polar bears that we have in AZA zoos now are paired up. We're doing the best that we can, but we're not seeing adequate numbers. So when people ask, are we going to have a polar bear? Well, we feel confident that yes, we're going to be able to get a polar bear, but I don't know where that animal's going to come from. We want to do what's best for the population. And it's too early to predict where that's going to come from. So it's getting late now, and I just want to ask one last
Sure.
question. Can you talk about the ringed seals and how the ice is affecting that very important prey species?
That's a good question. The ringed seal expert in Canada, his name is Tom Smith. And there's another bear biologist in the UK named Tom Smith. So between the three of us, we got a killer resume. And unfortunately, the work on ringed seals is like so much of this. It's expensive. It's difficult to census them. We've lost people out there on the Arctic ice trying to do this work. So right now there's around 8 million. It's the most abundant marine mammal in the Arctic. And it is really the driver for this whole system. I mean, we've got plankton, the primary producers that capture sunlight, and then they feed the whole food. But it's a really simple food chain from the plankton to these krill to cod to seals to polar bears. It's a pretty short food chain, not too complicated. So the ringed seals, though, as the ice retracts, one thing we didn't see there is there's a continental shelf all the way around. There it's maybe 100 meters deep, but out in the deep Arctic basin it's 600 meters deep. Over those kinds of parts of the ocean, it's very unproductive. So there's huge concern about whether ringed seals can survive or not either, because once the ice disappears, they don't have anywhere to haul out for their pups and so forth, or even to rest. And the more productive areas now will be ice-free. So what Steve's alluding, but the data are out. We don't really know. We just know that because of the physical relationship they have to the environment, they're going to be in big trouble as well. And we're already seeing a shift of the ecosystem. We have killer whales up there now. This is an animal that never was up there. They couldn't go up there with the, that big dorsal fin. You can't get on, the whales that associate with sea ice have little tiny fins, like bowheads. And but they're up there now. We've got walruses that are moving into there. It's just really getting bizarre. Things that we would expect. Anyway, I probably talked too much.